Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to just give it a few minutes while people roll in. But as we wait, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from and what organization you're with. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have a few people in here, so we're just going to get started. Welcome again. My name is Jordan Tobias, and I'm the manager of grants and programs here at the Foundation for Financial Planning. We're also joined by Rachel Roth, who is our lovely senior director of grants and programs, and she will speak towards the end of our webinar. Rachel and I, we are so pleased to be here today for our webinar, Pro Bono Practice, Purpose, and Profit, with psychologist and behavioral finance analyst, Dr. Naomi Win. Just a quick note before we start, this webinar is eligible for CFP Board's continuing education credit. So if you're a CFP, we will submit your credit to the CFP Board. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to take a few minutes to talk about FFP and the work that we do to expand pro bono financial planning. So many people, we get this question all the time, why pro bono financial planning? And the answer is simple. We know that millions of Americans need but can't access quality and ethical financial advice and guidance. So for almost 30 years, our goal has been to help communities in need by creating better access to quality financial advice. And we do this in a few major ways with your support. So first, we develop and support pro bono financial planning programs and partnerships with nonprofits around the country. One, we provide grant funding each year, technical assistance, and other resources to ensure that these programs are running effectively. And then we recruit and train financial advisors to do this pro bono service, and we connect them directly to volunteer opportunities through our platform, probonoplannermatch.org. And lastly, we lead the movement to foster pro bono service within the profession via our original research. And we also have a number of resources to support our CFP volunteers. So first, we have our pro bono volunteer training, which is a 50-minute free 1-hour module that helps advisors understand the basics of how to provide pro bono services. And this training is eligible for 1 hour of CE credit. Then we have Pro Bono Planner Match. And then lastly, we do provide E&O liability insurance to advisors who connect to a nonprofit or to a pro bono opportunity through our platform, probonoplannermatch.org. And so I encourage every CFP that's here with us today to join the pro bono movement by getting involved however you can, whether that be registering on our volunteer hub, probonoplannermatch.org, sign up to receive the latest pro bono news from us, or support our mission with a gift. Your work truly matters to millions of Americans in need, and we just would not be able to do this work without you. So please contact Rachel or my colleagues here listed on the screen anytime. Okay, and with that, we're thrilled to have Dr. Naomi Win with us. Naomi is a psychologist and behavioral finance analyst at Orion. She leverages and applies psychology to deepen advisor-client relationships, build investor resilience, and fortify returns in times of turbulence. By outlining the thoughts and emotions that influence financial choices, she helps advisors build strategies to improve their well-being and their finances. And she's here with us today to discuss how pro bono financial planning builds skills, enhances personal well-being, and strengthens the financial planning profession. So we thank you, Dr. Naomi, for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Just to check, you can hear me? We're all good?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. Let me just go ahead. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see some slides. 1 second. And then we'll get started. Okay. As Jordan mentioned, I'm Dr. Win. I'm a psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist, at least in terms of background, but I currently work with Orion. I work in financial kind of tech and wealth management in most places. But one of the things that drew me into this work was finding that there are a number of parallels, which we're going to start exploring in just a minute, between what I do as a clinical psychologist and some of the things that you do in your work handling finances. One of the things we're going to target today is answering what pro bono can actually do for you. When we think of pro bono, we so often think about, okay, it's doing something for the people, which it absolutely is. But one of the things we're going to look at today is what it does for you. There's a sort of bi-directional relationship happening here between you engaging in pro bono and serving other people, and then what happens for you professionally, as well as in your personal life and your health. And so we're going to get into that a little bit. We'll explore that. We'll get into how this work for the public good really applies in our industry. And then there's full spectrum of benefits from how we engage and then how we're going to get started. The reason why I think my particular angle has any sort of salience here as a clinical psychologist is just to do with the idea that both you and I do some similar things. There's some parallels here. When I go into clinical practice, I'm going in to work with somebody that is struggling. They've hit a barrier, a challenge. They need a new way of thinking. Their patterns aren't working for them anymore, and they need support in kind of getting over those barriers. That requires a good relationship, and it requires a lending of expertise that I've kind of devoted my life to and mapping it onto where they are and their particular circumstance to get them ahead. Now, the thing that happens in clinical practice, of course, is that anybody who walks through the door is going to have a completely different permutation of personal characteristics, situational kind of features. And that's what keeps the work, interesting, but also very, very varied and quite difficult sometimes. And there's a couple different things that I think align with what you do as CFPs and as financial professionals. Anybody who walks through your door has such a range of different factors going on that influence how well they can live their lives, if they're getting stuck, if there's a way to surmount the barrier. And you are the professional, the authority in the room here, who can really lend their expertise to completely changing somebody's life. And so we're going to explore that a little bit today too. We're going to start with a story here that I'm sure you're familiar with. This is a story about Midas, the king. This is told by Ovid, who is a Roman poet. So again, in this story, just in case you aren't familiar with it, it's about a king who was walking in his garden and just recognizes this satyr is a friend of the god, and so Midas is really hospitable to him, and is often the case with Greek mythology. Token of gratitude for the respect that's being shown to his satyr. And so he says to Midas, what would you like? What gift would you like? And Midas says, I'm going to request anything I touch be turned to gold. So Dionysus grants him this gift, and sure enough, Midas moves through his day, and everything he touches turns to gold. It's amazing. His banister up to his bedroom, his curtains, the flowers in the garden. Midas is reveling in this new power. But the enchantment sinister side is obviously soon revealed. He picks up grapes from his plate that he wants to eat. He tries to consume them, and they just turn to gold. His bread, his wine, everything he's trying to eat turns to gold. He realizes what he's done, and he's going hungry here, and he starts to feel despair. And so his daughter comes to comfort him, but as they embrace, it simply turns her into a golden statue. So Midas begins to pray to Dionysus here to relieve him of this particular gift here, because it's no longer a gift, it's turned into a curse. And Dionysus instructs him to bathe in a river, and as he's submerged, he's freed from this curse. And from that day forward, Midas commits to living humbly and treasure the riches that no amount of gold can buy. And I'm sure you've heard this story, or like a variant of that story, sorry, a million different times. The moral being money can't buy you happiness, wealth can be a double-edged sword, some things are more important than money. And all of this is absolutely true. And perhaps you've heard this particular framing of that idea before as well. If you were offered $50 million with no strings attached, you would take it, right? I definitely would. But if I was offered $50 million with the condition that for the rest of my life, can have absolutely nobody to share it with, nobody to care for, no one who cares for me, now this is a completely different question. And it suddenly holds a lot more kind of worth to think about in terms of my relationships and priorities to other people and things like that. So yes, there are things that are worth more than money. This is absolutely true. We're not refuting that. We know that money can't buy happiness here, but we also know that poverty can't buy anything. And I was actually just talking with Jordan and Rachel right before this about how Americans are really in tune with this particular fact at the moment. think a lot of us intrinsically know that money can't buy everything, it can't buy happiness. But when we think about what poverty can do, poverty leaves you in a position where you quite literally can't buy anything. You're talking about rent, you're talking about funding the hopes and dreams of what you do with your children or what you can afford them. You're talking about buying food, just cost of living. And this isn't just an anecdotal thing that I think a lot of people are sort of feeling inherently, or just kind of in their family circles or their friend circles. I think this is something that's backed up a lot by a number of different statistics. One of them being here that in April in 2023, the CFP board themselves found consumer sentiment survey results that indicated, with regard to the cost of living, that 63% of Americans are concerned about purchasing necessities. So that's just food and clothing. 55% are concerned about paying their rent or mortgage. 9 in 10 Americans are concerned about the cost of living in the US. This is all majority statistics. Again, in 2024, another report indicates 84% of Americans feeling financial stress, with food and housing driving the stress predominantly. Again, basics of life. More than half of Americans express fear about inflation, the prices of basics, with only 9% of Americans saying that their incomes might outpace that fear. Again, very, very dire statistics here. 63% of Americans did not see their financial situation as something that would even improve through 2024. And as we're staring 2025 in the face, it's not looking much better. We have about 80% of Americans unable to add to emergency savings in the last year. And 52% attributed the financial situation as a contributing factor to the decline in their mental health. So then it's really no surprise to find out that a Bankrate survey found 92% of Americans cited financial security as their top goal, with 88% citing financial insecurity as the main life stress. The upshot to all of this is a lot of numbers that I'm throwing at you, but my point here is that from a number of different sources, we've discovered that financial insecurity is destabilizing relationships, it's leaving dreams unrealized, and it's driving a very deep fear around food and housing, the basics of having a life that's conducive to living. So we know here, money alone can't buy happiness, poverty can't buy anything. And so what are we supposed to do? What do we do in this particular, in our particular area of the world, and to alleviate some of that? What I want to do here is talk about this with the framing of duality around money and meaning both, and how we account for it in theory, and then how we act in ways to balance those tensions with more operable steps. An image that comes to mind when I think about this topic dates back to 1909. It's from a card game. It's an image here that you can see on your screen. It was used to represent the concept of collaboration in work. So we have here a stonemason, an architect, and a priest, and they're all standing here in the cathedral. The priest can speak to what the purpose of the cathedral is, so what religious rites and rituals need to happen inside the cathedral here, and those would need to be accounted for in the design that the architects are going to make up, so that form of the cathedral will suit the function. The architect here, of course, is showing his plans in this particular drawing, his ideas of this very lofty material vision to kind of put down on paper. And then we have the stonemason over here on the left. He's keeping his balance on that bench there. And he's crafting this physical reality where the spirituality is housed in a purpose-made building. So how does any of this relate to money and meaning? Well, if we think about our own sort of inner architect, what do you dream of having and making in the world? What does it look like? How high does the spire go? All those kinds of things. And then you think about your inner priest, kind of, if we're using this particular imagery, what brings you meaning? What does your life have to embody, sort of spiritually or transcendentally, or in terms of truth, purpose, meaning, the sort of existential concerns around living? And then lastly, there's stonemason here. What form can any of this take? When we think about your dreams, think about what matters to you, we also have to think about the material reality. What form does all of that take, and how do we balance material dreams and meaningful purpose? And so if we focus entirely on our material flourishing, we kind of have this risk at play where we risk detaching from the reasons for living that the materiality initially sought to protect. So if we just kind of, if we're focusing, for example, I'm sure everyone's got some experience somewhat like this, if we focus so much on our work, to the point where we get so just busy trying to earn money that we kind of forget what the point of having the money is for, we've lost kind of contact with one of those facets. If we shift a bit, if we focus entirely on purpose and we're thinking about existential meaning and how do we find it, how do we chase it, we can really undermine our ability to provide enough resources to do that in health if we ignore the other facets. I think there's one single tool that really counterbalances the material myopia that can creep in, while also keeping your sense of purpose in perspective. And then on top of that, really augmenting your ability to do both of those things in such a way that will really help your ability to thrive and excel, not just personally, but also professionally. And before we get to that tool, what that tool is, I just want to zoom out a little bit from our personal relationship to money, which I think this image encapsulates, to a slightly more universal framing here. Okay. And for that, as we kind of zoom out, and I really am zooming out broadly here, we're going to ask a question that anthropologists, sociologists, artists, scientists, psychologists, everyone's debated. What is the indicator that a society is civilized? I'm always kind of curious asking this question. Sometimes, when we ask this question of people in sort of social skills groups or things they do as a psychologist, we always get some really fascinating responses. It can be anything from, oh, it's the judicial system, or it's a collectively agreed upon set of symbols that we uphold as values. It might be a legal code, perhaps an economy is considered an indicator society is civilized, or maybe there's infrastructure for education of the next generation. There's all kinds of different facets of demonstrating a society, is civilized. But I'm curious, what other people think, and I want you to kind of think about your own conception of that indicator. As we think about a particular anthropologist called Margaret Mead. So Margaret was groundbreaking in a number of ways in her field. She was very, very prominent as a researcher of cultural differences and comparisons of tribes, studying kind of various societal norms between tribes. And there's a legend that she said the sign of a civilized society in ancient cultures is a femur, so a thigh bone, that's been broken and healed. So the argument here in this legend is that Margaret Mead said if you kind of dig up a skeleton and you're researching, different ancient civilizations, if you find a skeleton that's clearly had a broken femur but it's healed, that would be an argument that this must have been a civilized society. And the reason why is because thigh bones take such a long time to heal. So you have, an individual that's essentially out of action for 6+ weeks, 12 weeks even sometimes. So you have this individual that has to be served and tended to and protected by a community and society. So the argument there is, okay, so if we find a skeleton that has that, this must have been a culture that didn't just say, oh, you're out of action, see you later. They tended to each other. The funny thing is about this story is that of all the recordings that we have of Margaret Mead speaking at her absolute zenith in the 60s and 70s, there is no evidence she actually said this. And yet it continues to circle around the internet, and even in some university undergrad classes, 50 years on. And when I think about that, it's quite powerful. Why do we keep circulating this rumor? Why do we keep circulating this idea of this indicator of a civilized society? And I honestly think it's because we wish it was true. As humans, we really wish that if we were to fall, somebody would catch us, because on some level, we recognize this is what makes us human. Something that Margaret Mead was recorded having said was this: to never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. She was recorded saying this, and I think this is true. So we might ask, why is the CFP recommending 20 hours a year of pro bono service in a field that is already so demanding of your time, your energy, your expertise? And the answer, I think, is this. When I think of pro bono service, it's really a hallmark of very rich professional traditions, whether it's medicine, psychology, any service that's been determined to be essential in a societal improvement and thriving, is given this responsibility to consider their role in the collective good. So it's a value in our culture. It's almost like a hope that we can improve, flourish, thrive, have that financial security and growth, and being a really, really big part of that too. And for any community, any society that's thriving, that financial security and growth is going to be a big part of individual and collective well-being there. And so the argument here is that if pro bono service is part of this for hallmark traditions, financial service is absolutely a part of that. And they are absolutely a necessary and essential part, an essential service that requires a high level of expertise that not everybody can just have. And we need professionals for that, as you well know. I also think that as we participate in pro bono, we're using that kind of, if you think about a tightrope walker holding a balance pole, I think about pro bono like that. It helps you kind of have this balance in your own life as you're kind of walking that line between purpose and profit and meaning and money. And meeting people at the point of need is a threshold that's really met by any field that's reached a place in a society where we recognize the skill's crucial, it's vital, it's important to our well-being. And I think that when I think about financial professionals, because you are key navigators for people through a landscape that is remarkably thorny and it's high stakes. In so many ways, your service actually gatekeeps a lot of people's ability to find success. Your work can break financial disordered patterns that people have, Your work can really change an inheritance of bad habits financially and help people change their present and then define their future. We're talking about changing lives, changing trajectories, and getting these opportunities, that butterfly effect, out into the world. And I really do think that people who are working in financial planning directly impact people's ability to live lives that make them happy, which you think about that on a broader scale of the world is really incredible. And when we think about your job, and if you think about your job, how would you answer the question of why you do what you do? And think about how it's changed as you progress in your career. So if you think about your reason for doing this job, what comes to mind? Obviously, we're all working primarily to earn money to support our own reasons for living. But why work in financial advising and planning and wealth management? Why this and not something else? I ask because I think for all of us, it's really easy to get caught up in the demands of every minute that we really can lose sight of the big picture sometimes. So having that pause to just revisit the why of why we do this, because losing touch with why we do what we do means we simply won't do it as well. So if we can take a moment to reconnect with that, that would be my starting point for the argument I want to make here. I think that a lot of people I speak to, a lot of advisors and financial planners I speak to, when I ask this question, they've reported back to me that it has to do with a sort of problem-solving element. There's almost like a detective work element here in discovery with clients that has this really, really big impact on people's lives. So you have this sort of abstract concept of investments and finances, these numbers on a page. How does that translate to somebody's happiness in their lived experience? There's a problem-solving element there that a lot of advisors have expressed kind of being a big draw to the job. And in short, there's kind of this huge amount of opportunity to really accomplish a lot of things. And what I did when I was kind of digging around looking for research too was get my hands on something that the Kitces research study from Advisor Wellbeing did in 2020. This is not just my anecdotal kind of understanding of financial work. I think it's backed up by these statistics. If we think about 2020, which was an absolute roller coaster for the stock market, Kitces was using this tool called the Comprehensive Inventory of Thriving, which evaluates well-being across different facets. So there's 7 here. There's relationships, engagement, mastery, autonomy, meaning, optimism, and subjective well-being. So they were looking at these as sort of facets of well-being as people are working in their jobs. The research that they came out with, and again, in 2020, roller coaster year for financial people, the research demonstrates that financial advisors outscored the general population in all 18 subscales, with accomplishment endorsed most highly. In other words, the sense of accomplishment attainable for financial advisors, planners, and professionals vastly outpaces other careers. There's a question here. Why is this a field where there's such high potential to experience a sense of accomplishment? When I think about that question, there's a lot of different kind of ways to answer it, but one is to break the sense of accomplishment down. So what does accomplishment mean? I think it means a couple different things: having a sense of value, knowing what you do has value, and then being able to deliver that to somebody else. There's also a sense of growth, development, participation in advancement. There's a development of skills, kind of that living, breathing, growing kind of aspect. And then also there's profiting, so that you can live your own life in ways that you want to, actualize your own dreams, and be happier. So this study essentially suggests that anything in financial advising, planning, and wealth planning hits all of these dimensions. And what I thought as I saw this research was that it was quite funny in that the breakdown of accomplishment really parallels a very well-established area of psychology that postulates the following model to break down what healthy well-being encompasses. This is called the PERMA theory. This is a question, of course, that the field of psychology sought to answer for over, for forever. How do we be happy? How do human beings be happy? And psychology's put forward a lot of different answers to this. There's a lot of different approaches to this question, one of which was codified by Dr. Martin Seligman. So this is the PERMA theory, it's Seligman's theory here. His research suggested that our flourishing as human beings, our ability to feel a sense of happiness or well-being, depends on our ability to foster growth in these areas. I'm sure you're seeing the parallels between the financial advisor study and this. The positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning and accomplishments. Positive emotion would be sort of spending, having good experiences, spending time with people you care about, practicing gratitude, hearing a song that you really like, or, kind of enjoying some exercise. Engagement might be described as something like flow state. So being able to be immersed in an activity, whether that is being out in nature, whether, again, for some people that is exercise, or kind of enjoying making something. There's positive relationships here. So this could be like an old friendship where you feel valued and heard and known for a long time, or it might be joining a community or a group that have a common interest, or even just learning something more about people you love. Meaning speaks to purpose a little bit. So we think back to that image of the priest in the cathedral. This would be the priest role here. Just purpose. So being guided by values that really extend beyond your self-interest, connecting with a greater truth of being, asking how you can use your passions to help others. And then lastly, this accomplishments. This is really speaking to advancement and growth, because that the ability to develop and grow lends to well-being way more so than riches or fame or anything like that. And so financial advising, if we put these two things together, the Kitzer study and the PERMA theory, financial advising, wealth planning, management has a high potential for you to feel accomplishment. And psychological research tells us that this is the case and tells us when it's contextualized by a life where we're fostering meaning, positive emotion, positive relationships, and engagement, we are on track for improved well-being. Now, guess what the researchers found that pro bono practice does for people? The exact same things. The Foundation for Financial Planning actually has research itself that serves as a really good resource on this topic. And again, I'm not affiliated directly with the Foundation for Financial Planning. And so I went through this research as kind of an independent approach to it and was amazed by how comprehensive it is. I have not found anything else as comprehensive or even close. And it's a really, really good piece of research. And it explores the metrics of pro bono practice in terms of impact on financial professionals in a range of different ways. This survey covers almost 1,200 CFPs, so a significant population to draw from. And the most comprehensive one, this is the most comprehensive piece of research done on professionals and pro bono to date. And they found that of those engaging in pro bono work, 99% of them have found that the satisfaction they get from helping others really continues to motivate them in their work and their service as an ongoing thing. You can see here that 77% felt motivated because it let them give back and play a very active role in advancing the profession. We have 71% feeling motivated by the improvement skills that it lent for their practice. All this to say, this field has a really high potential for accomplishment, and it has this arm of the field coming into purview much more formally now, where it's recognized as beneficial, not just to the professional discipline, but advisors' well-being. So sometimes when we think about pro bono practice, we think, okay, yeah, I can see how that benefits the field, but it asks a lot of us, it really does. And so what I want to do is pair this with the research that I'm very familiar with from the psychological kind of field to talk about what it does with well-being. So let's go ahead. We're going to break down now how while you serve other people, that process can really change you in terms of change you for the better, essentially, along these particular dimensions. So what psychological research has demonstrated is that pro bono service improves health and happiness. It augments a sense of meaning and purpose. It advances skills and accomplishment, and then it has positive business impact too. This is also a kind of newer area of research here. So we'll get into the psychological research around service because it's not just kind of this warm, fuzzy, saccharine talking point. Research has very legitimately demonstrated that service quantitatively changes people for the better in terms of health, happiness, meaning, and purpose. And service isn't so much even just about being a do-gooder or taking cookies to your neighbor, which is fantastic, but it's actually really about excelling in your expertise. It's recognizing that you have something of high value and your ability to engage those that need it most while you deliver this. And these again, this is a population that are often very barred from this particular service and expertise. This sharing of your value will benefit you in ways that nothing else can. If you engage in pro bono practice, it will absolutely sharpen your current skills. It'll teach you new ones. And the research demonstrates that if you're intentional in your support of these practices, it'll give your practice the edge to recruit and engage the sharpest talent that will actually grow your firm as well. And we're going to get into that a little bit as well. We'll switch gears for just a brief moment so I can tell you a little story. Again, we're going back in here into kind of Greek myths here. If you're familiar with the stories of Achilles, his mother had dipped him in the river Styx. So when he was just a baby, his mother was concerned about, the future of her child and the injuries he might, sustain and whatnot. And so she wanted to make him invulnerable, and she had this option to dip him in the river Styx to make him invulnerable. And so she holds her baby by the heel of his foot, dips him in the river. He comes out, he's invulnerable. And so he becomes this incredible warrior and hero, except the part of his body that his mother held, his heel, his mother held to dip him in the river, it was not invulnerable. And that's exactly what led to his downfall. So this one little tiny part of him that was not immersed in the thing that gave him strength actually turned out to be a weakness for him. So the upshot here is recognizing that the part of us that isn't immersed in practice becomes our weakness. And when I think about this in terms of, when I think about this application to my life, I think about when I started playing violin. I started playing when I was 5 years old. As I grew up, I practiced for hours a day during my teen years, took it very seriously, was very proficient at playing, relatively enough that I could that I could perform in a number of different settings. I was so immersed in violin, so forth and so on. And then I decided to switch gears and focus on academics through undergrad, through grad school. I had children. Um, I did not really play the violin very much. And so just over the course of time, I played less and less. And I've gotten to the point now where I can still read music, and I can still correct my kids as they practice piano and I hear them from another room and something's flat, something's sharp. I can still remember that. But if I was to pick up my violin right now and try to play the pieces that I used to play, there is absolutely no way I would be able to do that. The muscle memory just wouldn't come through, even if my head can kind of theoretically remember what the piece is meant to sound like. And I find this is the case with all skills. The areas that are not immersed in practice actually become an Achilles heel. So pro bono for me here is an excellent chance in this regard to really pit our skills against reality to see where we can sharpen up. So if we want something again that just immerses us in practice, pro bono is it. The research done by the FFP demonstrated 87% of CFPs found pro bono developed their knowledge in financial strategies and debt management. Now, that figure actually goes up to 92% if we're focused on CFPs that are under the age of 35. So we have, again, look, these statistics here, 85% indicating a boost in skills around cash flow management, 85% indicating this kind of boost here. So 74% indicating the ability to build skill in the area of sources of money conflict. 73% found increasing skills related to retirement savings and income planning. So all these hard skills of our profession are demonstrably improved by pro bono. Each of these skills is sharpened and it really conveys value for our practice. We think about it, continuing ed, like attending courses like these, it's fantastic. It's required to keep our job, our knowledge base fresh for our job in the industry and so forth and so on. But pro bono is really where we kind of see rubber meet road on this. So we can go to all the CE we want, we can learn about how to manage money conflict better when we're working with couples. We can do all that. But pro bono is an incredible place to kind of test out if that's actually something we're able to do. If we think about pro bono too, we're often exposed to a completely different demographic of people that are often barred from our service. I mean, that's kind of inherent to the relationship there, which really helps you pit your skills against something new and different and sharpen up. Again, all the skills you can see here, these are soft skills now. These are improved by pro bono too. Something that's been interesting to me from a behavioral finance analyst kind of perspective is that over the past few years, we've seen a big shift. The hard skills of the profession, again, we need those are vital. But what we've learned from Merrill Lynch, Schwab had an RIA benchmark study. We had Bain actually had something come out earlier this year. Along with McKinsey, what they found is that the demographic of client expectations is really shifting. And what we're shifting to is seeing a demand for soft skills to be really on par with our hard skills there. So we have that kind of functional proficiency level. That's fantastic. It's required, it's necessary. Everything we do adds value that way. But the behavioral coaching aspect, those tactics and the ability to have good communication skills, empathy, interacting with diverse client base, and having particular leadership skills, that's actually what's lifting the ceiling on our ability to be most proficient in our jobs. The behavioral coaching here really relies on our ability to communicate very well and listen, because I mean, if you think about it, it won't really matter how good your planning skills are, how good those hard skills are, if your client's not feeling heard or understood in their financial goals and you can't communicate to them the path by which that they need to change behaviors, for example, so that the client can understand and adhere to this plan to get to their goals. So that communication piece is vital, and that's a big part of why pro bono is so important for us. So again, if you're wanting to kind of grow your practice, or you're thinking about pivoting to alternate roles in your firm, pro bono is going to operate to diversify client base and improve leadership skills in a way that translates to use within the scope of your broad career trajectory, and kind of accelerating that too. And the other thing about this that I thought was interesting is that if you're long in the tooth in this career, pro bono is going to get you really sharp. But if you're newer to it, if you're in that under 35-year-old demographic, pro bono is going to get you up to speed. So we see here again, 81% of CFPs under 35 saw improvement in their communication skills, which again, really, really necessary for strong client interactions there too. Generally speaking too, younger planners are recognizing the benefit of pro bono very widely. The Journal for Financial Planning actually just recently published an article that highlights that these kind of next generation advisors, when they engage in pro bono, they find it really important. Again, for a number of different reasons, improving their own skills is a big part of that. But there's also a drive to improve social infrastructure, so that it can actually sustain life. Young people are often acutely aware of this, and so they want to apply their skills so they can be part of what might be considered a rising tide, so it lifts all boats. Research is demonstrating that younger planners especially value this acquisition of new skills and see positive impact on practice. And pro bono provides all of that. So if you're asking the question of how can I bring a competitive edge to recruitment efforts, or how do I attract the best and brightest in the field, the answer here is going to be promoting pro bono and endorsing it, and better yet, incorporating it into your practice expectations and then supporting that effort. We know that firms encouraging pro bono have a very competitive edge in recruiting. So if you're looking to expand your practice or retire, anything like that, engaging younger entrants that are top tier, which is, important for succession plans here, this is going to be a good pathway to that. Reason being too is that it's going to pair that advancement of skills and accomplishment of your positive business impact that we're talking about here, but it's also going to help to promote health and happiness for you, and then for the people you're potentially hiring, and then also meaning and purpose as well. One thing I think about, again, when I think about pro bono in that regard, so I think about that kind of professional skill set, the accomplishment it allows, and then I think about the meaning and purpose that it augments. I think about it as almost as if you have two horses and pulling a chariot. And one of those horses is those kind of that professional skill set, and the other part is that kind of meaning and purpose for myself. You don't want those two things out of balance, and that's kind of what we talk about with work-life balance, essentially. And I think if you have pro bono, those kind of puts reins on both of those horses, so that you're gaining and improving in a way that professionally, enhances your skill set and then also your life. So you have this positive feedback loop between professional success and then those kind of existential bonuses that, again, positive feedback into your success. If we think about the statistics that we were talking about earlier with regard to Americans recognizing there's just an incredible amount of stress around money and financial security. In fact, some of the piece of research indicated that Americans were unable to pull together $1,000 last year for an emergency expense out of their savings. This was a real struggle for Americans. If you want to put a number on it, it's about $1,000, which is harsh for people. If we think about where Americans are, what they're reporting, where their concerns are, the relationship to money in the general populace, we have to recognize this is a situation that has almost no margin for error. So there's this professional sharpening for you, a highly qualified individual, providing really critical services to those that are most in need of very competent, ethical, objective financial guidance. And again, there's that obvious element of service, you're giving your time and skill to boost those in need. And also you're kind of capitalizing on compassion in a way that's boosting other people and yourself too, which is fantastic. And that's something we're going to talk about a little more. I think when we think about compassion, we can think about something that's very sort of soft and nebulous. But psychology has actually treated compassion quite seriously because it's been demonstrated to give purpose and improve physical health, as well as strengthening mental health, which again, if we go back to that statistic of Americans generally feeling a lot of stress, this is very, very relevant. We also have research to demonstrate that financial planners actually have an incredibly stressful job. The statistics are a little bit unnerving, and I don't mean to alarm anybody, but it has been indicated that financial planners, when there's a financial crisis broadly in the world, financial planners demonstrate a high degree of symptoms that are far too close to being defined as, similar and parallel, or at least adjacent to PTSD. The job in financial planning can be remarkably stressful. So again, compassionate service, there's a lot of research that goes into it because it's been demonstrated to improve physical health and mental health, especially through difficult times. In fact, it's been taken seriously enough that Stanford psychologists founded a Center for Compassion, Altruism, Research and Education called CCARE, which they developed this sort of secular compassion training program in order to help people kind of step out of self-focus so they can access a sense of meaning beyond themselves, because this perspective is extremely correlated with higher quality of life, a sense of satisfaction with living, sense of work-life balance, all these other things. And I think this is something that we need with increasing importance. Something I think about a lot is especially as my kids are coming up too, is when I was a kid growing up in England, there was only 4 TV channels. That was it. So if we watched TV at nighttime and you went to school the next day, if there was anything worth watching, there's a fair chance everybody at school had seen the same TV show at the same time. But as I got older and older, some people got cable, some people got satellite, people DVR'd things, that was a thing. And so everyone could kind of record a show and watch it at their leisure. And now we're at a point where we all have separate algorithms. So we're all on these streaming services. Somebody's on Netflix or Hulu or whatever else, and there's these personalized streams of media. So there's a fair chance that the media I consume has zero overlap with my next door neighbor. Point being that we're in a world of increasing choice. There is a decreasing amount of communal space, which is kind of strange when we think about it in terms of social media, because technically we're more connected. I could quite literally look up what somebody had for lunch, somebody that I maybe knew in like sixth grade, what they had for lunch last week. And yet, research has demonstrated over and over that this heavy social media use is actually linked to isolation, alienation, depression, anxiety. Point being, we're in a time when we're very flooded by the appearance of increased connection and shared space, but it's actually divested of all the interpersonal benefits. So we have these ancient brains wired towards social engagements. We're social beings. And to stave off these illnesses engendered by alienation and isolation, we now find that we have to be very, very intentional about fostering practices that help us connect with other people. It's very, very difficult to do. And so my argument here, all this to say, is that compassion and service are the fastest, absolute fastest way to do this. It's the fastest way in on doing this deliberately and intentionally. And so this is another benefit of this. Dr. Jimpa from the Stanford Research Center that I mentioned, the one on compassion, found that sometimes we can be a bit worried about compassion, worried we're going to overextend in compassion, which is, it's a real concern that if somebody struggles when they start to give to people, they struggle to know when to stop. That can be a legitimately real concern. We'll talk about a little bit how the Foundation for Financial Planning actually have a method of doing pro bono that will kind of head that off, nip that in the bud before it kind of gets going. If you happen to be somebody that can get kind of invested in somebody else's, in providing compassion for somebody in service and just kind of, losing track of time in that particular direction. That is a legitimate concern. However, compassion is really not a weakness here, it is a strength. I think there's also a concern that if people don't have compassion for other people, they're going to lose track of their own goals and things like that. So finding that balance is important. But one thing we have noticed about compassion is that if we engage in it in a sort of limited intentional sphere, it increases all of these things you can see on your screen on the left while reducing all of the things that we have here on the right. It gives this sense of purpose. So you're able to find a sense of usefulness to yourself in the context of others. It can also really catalyze emotions that can often paralyze us. So instead of feeling sort of a self-criticism for your weaknesses or your shortcomings, compassion actually helps you feel motivated to change, not because, oh, I'm so awful, I need to change. You feel motivated to change because you just want to care for your well-being. You just want to grow, which is a complete reframing that psychologists have found can be so beneficial in actually making tangible changes in your life or growing and developing and finding that kind of sense of accomplishment. Compassionate service too has actually been demonstrated to elongate your life and improve physical health too. There's a study of over 2,000 people undertaken by the University of Chicago that found extreme loneliness was twice as likely to cause death as obesity or high blood pressure, can you believe? And guess what psychologists have found reduces loneliness? Compassionate service. We know that even on a neurological level, it's been shown when we feel and tend to kind of tend to other people's burdens, that actually regulates our own distresses in life too. So this is an incredibly multifaceted tool. One of the biggest barriers psychologists have found to people feeling a sense of purpose in life is isolation. So feeling so alone in the road that we're traveling that we don't really see the point of walking it anymore. It's a big part of depression, anxiety, all these other things. And one of the biggest kind of ways to insulate ourselves from that loss is engaging in something compassionate. You might have heard this allegory before. It's the allegory of the long spoons. And it's a parable told in all different kinds of cultures and religions as well. And there's a couple different variants of the story, but the moral's the same. And the one that I heard when I was growing up was that there would be people at a table and they were eating a stew and everybody had a spoon, but the handle of the spoon would be about 3 to 4 foot long. Incredibly, could not feed themselves. Obviously, our arms are not that long. And so everybody at the table was kind of starving. They have this stew in front of them, but the spoons are too long. They can't feed themselves from the bowl. And it's only when they realize that they have to feed their neighbor, that's when they too can be fed. And so when I think about compassionate service, that's the image that comes to mind for me. As we embark on a path that others have paved and continue to travel on, we start to find this community of people who know this secret to finding yourself by supporting others. Our culture really profits from the idea that we find a sense of purpose due to our special gifts, the things that set us apart, and all those things can be great about us. But we really want to integrate them into how we see ourselves in terms of how we share the gifts with others. Because if we don't, they sort of lose meaning. If we recognize our own gifts and that's it, we just stop right there, that's really just part of the truth. The really important part here is that the growth of those gifts put to use in the service of others is actually how they grow. So for those of us who are at a table where nobody's in need, pro bono pushes us to look beyond our immediate sphere to those who do need it. They're not people who are not naturally part of our ecosystem. And this plays to sharpen our skills through new challenges, and also helps us kind of change our personal narrative and our arc by giving this much richer understanding of the world around us, not just having this highly custom ecology that we really run the risk of insulating ourselves with. And it's a temptation, especially as we go through harder times, whether that's financial, personal, whatever else, that we want to insulate and just kind of maintain our level of comfort. And weirdly, paradoxically, almost, if we extend a little beyond that to look for those that need help, we do actually manage to achieve that goal by doing that. There's another benefit of this engagement with altruism, and that's gratitude. You start to find that you're part of something bigger, that other people really need your skill, and that you are an active part of positive impact in changing this huge thing you're a small part of. And there's a big kind of aspect of this that has to do with feeling gratitude. So there'll be gratitude for yourself and gratitude for your skills, the effort you've put in to get where you've gotten yourself, and the ability to have the expertise that you do. And you'll be able to engage with that a little more as you use that in the service of other people. It's kind of one thing to sit back and say, look at where I've gotten in life. I've done a really good job, put hard work in, and I'm an expert in this area, really good financial professional. It's fantastic. But unless we put that in the service of other people, we lose out on having that framing of recognizing that gratitude in that particular context, that it's really there we can improve not just our own life, but other people's lives. Research came out of Harvard actually just earlier this year about this. They found that this particular practice, this engaging in compassion, cultivating gratitude, actually reduces blood pressure too. So if you're looking for an extra benefit, there it is right there. We have Dr. Susan Albers, who came out of Cleveland's clinic, who summed this up as well. She explained that altruism, what she found, she's kind of working in neurological research. They found that altruism activates the reward center in your brain. So there's this release of serotonin, dopamine, endorphins when we're engaging in altruism. So I know sometimes when we think of service and compassion, we think about extension. We think about tiring ourselves, putting something out there, or thinking about something sort of saccharine and sweet. But it's actually about our brains. It's about changing our neurology. It's about changing our personal narrative, who we are, how we make sense of life, and kind of engaging in these kind of physical aspects that have mental benefit. Service is really an effective way to bring meaning and find this kind of personal purpose in connective ways that will service our community. So if we think about the arc of our own lives, if you have special connections to causes, think about how you came up where you got where you are. Maybe you have a particular connection to widows, veterans, families struggling with healthcare concerns, and maybe find a niche that speaks to you. And then if you're able to locate that and serve that, you're really going to engage with compassion in a very dialed in way. The idea of sort of giving until it hurts is bandied about as if it equates to good service, but we know that's not realistically healthy, and we'll talk about that briefly now. Of course, if all you did was pro bono service, you wouldn't have the balance you need for keeping that roof over your own head, which, of course, you can't be of service to anybody else if you're in that particular state. This selfless giving in the absence of self-preservation is really inefficient. There is a book written by somebody called Adam Grant. He's a motivational psychologist. It's called Give and Take, I think. He terms this as the concept of being other-ish. So other-ish is being willing to give more than you receive while still protecting your own interests. And herein kind of the keystone here. So if you're engaging in pro bono work and you're balancing your own interests, you're going to benefit massively. You're going to sharpen your skills, have that competitive edge in recruiting, you're going to engage soft skills, hard skills, and you're giving to others, lifting others up, engaging with compassion, finding meaning beyond yourself. And you're kind of doing that balancing act we talk about with the two horses and the reins. And it's recognizing your skill set's valuable, but so is your time. So here's the thing: is we're going to balance that self-interest and self-preservation and that pro bono work. I think this is the best tool to do it. The best use of your energy is not going to be spending weeks scouting out connections, trying to figure out who needs help, who can you give to. The skill set here, I mean, you work in this field, you're a professional and you're an expert at this. Your skill set's best served when you're just going straight into engaging with that help, just taking a case and going for it, rather than spending weeks trying to figure out how to do that. And this pro bono planner match through the FFP really, to me, is one of the fastest ways to do this and just get straight involved in that work and use your time most effectively. So you can help that balance that self-interest and that pro bono service. This code on your screen right now, and this would actually take you directly to the particular tool. You get connected with the nonprofit host, exactly as Jordan mentioned earlier, and get straight to work. If you go through this platform too, you'll be automatically covered by, you can be covered by pro bono liability insurance that can be provided free from FFP, which I think is just amazing. I want to kind of just loop that back around to, if we think about that balance, we want to engage with that compassion, we want to get that gratitude process going, we want to do the pro bono work, and we want to self-preserve. As we think about that balance, I want to just kind of add a couple bits of information to frame that a little more broadly. So again, if we want to go back to that statistic here, about half of Americans, actually it's a bit more than half of Americans, that are unable to pull together even $1,000 for an emergency expense. If you think about that, your skill set in relation to that demonstrates you are an indispensable guide for those who need support in a very complex financial world, for those who ordinarily just can't afford it. So your profession's not just one of value, but it's a critical service to those that are chronically underserved. You're a provider of this very competent and objective financial guidance for those who are most at risk for being sunk by their financial stresses. Again, thinking back to those statistics we started this with. So when you do need to make a living, of course, and that's important, that self-preservation and self-interest is absolutely important. But that's kind of why this participation in pro bono is recommended at about 20 hours a year, and why this tool is kind of important. That can technically be enough here. It's your chance to make meaning, sharpen your skills, and have that 20 hours a week of very intentional service will be enough to add to your sense of purpose and kind of keep your work in perspective. And with regard to that perspective, we can put this even more in context by zooming out farther. Again, think about this. Life is very stressful. Americans are very worried about their financial situation, and the research shows that they're worried about just even meeting basic needs. Very, very difficult. Psychological research indicates that in these kind of situations where anxiety and fear around the future and uncertainty is high, one of the best things to do is really focus on what you can control. So if you think about it, none of us can control the market, but we can control our budget. We can control the steps to reach our financial goals and security, things like that. Now, what happens when you don't know how to control those things? Everything's suddenly uncontrollable. So that stress level's through the roof. A lot of the time, we need somebody to point the way. We need a community or somebody to show us, give us support and direction from a professional on how to control the controllable here. And that's you. You are the professional here. So I want to think about this kind of imagery that comes to mind when I think about what you're capable of doing and why it's so important and why I even made this presentation. We think about it. We have a train that's going from, let's pretend a train that's going from New York to Miami, right down that coastline. If the train gets to North Carolina and the track is switched, that switch in the tracks at first, it only changes course by about, an inch. Yet that same train could very well end up in Kansas. How? Well, that one small switch starts with an inch, but it can completely change the trajectory of that train's destination, kind of where it goes. And I think about pro bono in the same way. You are a crucial skill set. And in just 20 hours a year, it might be enough to add that 1 inch switch in somebody's habits, financial plans, behaviors, and it might completely change somebody's financial trajectory. That might actually get them where they want to go, get them on a track that helps them go where they want to go to achieve their goals and get that financial security that eludes so many Americans. You have a skill that directly influences and reduces at-risk family stress and the ability to live a life with less fear through this pro bono work. And on top of that, as I've mentioned, also helps you manage your own stress. It actually reduces anxiety, helps your life get balance and gender compassion. And I want to kind of speak to that in just a couple different ways, just as we close this course, and it's kind of somewhat of a challenge. Psychology has outlined that compassion comes in 3 different facets, and if we engage with all 3, we're kind of maximizing our ability to have all these benefits. The first is compassion for self. So as we kind of come to a close of this, it would be potentially interesting for you to think about that. How do you express and demonstrate compassion for yourself? How do we demonstrate gratitude, both give it and receive it in both ways? And then how can you do that in relation to balancing self-preservation and service for others? And my argument, of course, as you well know by this point, is engaging in pro bono service. And so that is the conclusion of my presentation. I'm going to take my screen sharing off, and I think if we have any questions, I think we have a couple minutes to speak to some of those.
Thank you so much, Naomi. This was an amazing presentation, so fresh and original, and I learned so much. And I've seen this presentation before, and each time just amazed by how much I love it. If anyone has any questions, please put your questions in the Q&A tool. We've had some good comments in the chat.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't see any of those. If anyone's got anything there that I can speak to.
Yes, Steve said midway through the presentation, this training is an example of insights, perspectives attained and further developed from pro bono. Another aspect that is not talked about enough that may have been touched on lightly on the initial slides is a sense of community and support with pro bono partners and client communities as possible allies through empathy and insight.
That's really good. Oh, yeah. Wow. I'm seeing some really great comments. We have one here on Maslow's hierarchy of needs too. Yeah, that basic level of skills. There are so many people that can't even access that bottom level of just the ability to satisfy physical safety and things like that. And I think before I was anything associated with kind of the financial planning world, I sort of thought, wow, that sounds like such an awesome service. Like, I can't afford it. It sounds amazing though. And didn't really think about it. And when I started to realize, how much just having one expert sit down with you and say, hey, look, here's what we can do. Here's how you can, just having some direction, and having that sense of kind of partnership with somebody is life-changing. It truly, truly is. Oh, there are so many people here that are already doing some pro bono stuff. That's awesome.
That's wonderful. And just so everyone knows, we will share the slides and we will share a recording of this presentation. For all the CFPs in the audience, we will report your participation in this to the CFP board so that you get continuing education credit. And I also, Naomi talked about our case for pro bono. And if you're interested in learning more, that's the research that we did of almost 1,200 CFP professionals on perspectives on pro bono. Revealed a compelling case for pro bono that Naomi touched on, the moral, business, and professional development underpinnings. You can find that on our website if you'd like to learn more. We recently did an additional study of aspiring CFP professionals, and we're going to be releasing the findings from that in the coming weeks. So please stay tuned. We encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, check out our website, and stay connected. Any other questions? Let me see if we have any others. This is a question from James. In my pro bono experience, I've come across many cases where credit card debt can be overwhelming. How to address the despair?
It's a really good question. I think when I work in private practice with clients that are overwhelmed by something, especially if they're overwhelmed by past decisions that they can no longer kind of attenuate or actively change other than sort of reduce the ongoing impact of, this can be particularly difficult. The first thing that I always do with a client is go in with empathy about that. So that's where I would start. It can be very tempting to, especially with credit card debt, there's a couple of different factors at play. One is, well, that debt has something to do with your behavioral choices. That's a reality. The other reality is that credit card kind of rates can be predatory. That's a reality. There were all these kind of realities, some of which were in somebody's control, but now aren't in their control and actually at the mercy of something that's much, much bigger than any of us can possibly control. So I think recognizing that can be really helpful, just because it helps to sort of, it sort of gets you on the same page. My goal here in therapy that I think directly translates to your work is setting up what we call a working alliance. So the first thing we have to do to get any therapeutic work done is demonstrate and understand that we get the client. And if we don't understand the client, we're going to ask the questions to understand the client. We really want to kind of get on the same page. So building that rapport by showing, yeah, there's a lot of things here that are very distressing. I completely understand this distress. Why do you understand this distress? Well, they made these decisions, but now the consequences have ballooned out of control, things like that. Oh, there's another thing that's popped up in the chat too, to help those. It has resources for people overwhelmed with debt too, which looks helpful. Fostering that empathy, I think, can be beneficial first, because there's a lot of shame that often goes hand in hand with credit card debt. So I think kind of being able to tackle shame would be the first one to before we even get to the problem solving. I think a lot of the time we hear that and we think, okay, let's make a plan. There's this level of debt. Here's what we can do. Everything else, jump in with the problem solving. And I think the problem solving is vital. You have to get there at some point. But we want to just back up a minute first. Before we jump into problem solving, let's start with kind of being able to attenuate the shame around it, because that will really facilitate somebody being able to change their behavior and not keep going into that kind of sunk cost fallacy of, I'm in this much debt, who even cares anymore? I can't do anything. It's kind of reclaiming that a little bit. So I would start with empathy, normalizing, getting on the same page, having that rapport. And then once you have that rapport going, able to talk about kind of dismantling the shame around that, the shame spiral that people can get stuck in, because that contributes to the despair. And it's almost as if you start shedding and divesting all of these emotions from the hard reality. And then we're ready to look at the numbers here and look at what can we do? What is in our control to move forward, to minimize this? What can we do about it? Because I think, you know, if we try to jump into the problem solving too quickly, the despair, I really like that you asked that question. The fact that you asked that question indicates to me that you care about the socio-emotional side of it, because you've already made that connection between somebody being hampered by that. It really hampers their progress to make behavioral changes. Another thing I was going to mention too is if you have somebody who's dealing with that despair, expressing faith in your client, that you're going to do the best you possibly can to help them move forward, and you have faith that they can change their behavior too, so they can move forward. That is a huge part. That's been backed up from research with clinicians in psychology, physicians in healthcare, all different professionals, that if the professional in the room demonstrates faith in the client, that actually boosts the client ability to change behavior too. So hopefully some of those are a little bit helpful. It looks like there's some good resources in the chat specific to this as well.
I love that. That makes sense. Having faith in the client totally makes sense. And we're out of time, but maybe one last question. If you have any insight that Kevin asked, do you have any thoughts on how to best work with folks who don't have computer skills?
Wow, that's a really good one. So my answer to that would be, this is a little work on your part too, but figuring out where the library is, because the library actually has, most of the time, libraries have community resources. A couple of friends who are librarians on the East Coast, they're often trained to help people get basic computer skills, and kind of do that from a community health kind of approach of supporting somebody in feeling empowered to even get past that barrier of like, I'm not a computer person. That's a huge mental barrier, is I'm not a computer person. And then there's the barrier of I don't have a computer, and that hard reality, that's a hard one too. The library can kind of help you as a support system to tag team on developing both those things. And that can be a support. I think my advice there would be to don't go this alone. Make sure you check in with another colleague or a peer and see what kind of network you can build to kind of share that weight. I mean, it really would depend too. I apologize, it's a vague answer because I suppose I don't know the specifics of your case, but it depends whether the skill set is, I don't own a computer, I don't have internet, which is, you know, a social infrastructure problem, or a wealth kind of management problem, or I'm not a computer person and I don't know how to go on the internet, for example. Those would be sort of different problems. But reaching out for support from the local library might be a place to start there, to see if you can get somebody feeling less scared of broaching things on a computer, because the kind of part of reality is that we are moving into a time where a lot of this is done that way. Again, if you kind of engage in pro bono, there's nothing in working through this portal, for example, that would limit your ability to use those hours to say, let's sit down and we'll go over a couple basics of that yourself. But yeah, again, I would need a little more specific details, I think, to give better advice, but hopefully there's something in there that's beneficial.
Thank you so much. Just want to be conscious of your time and everyone else's. We really appreciate you being here today and everyone who joined us. So thank you so much and have a great day. Feel free to reach out to me and Jordan anytime with questions.
So, thank you. Bye. Nice to see you,
Thank you so
Rachel.
much.
Bye,
Bye.
Jordan.